Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. David Ramirez found the tent first, zipped shut from the outside, stakes driven deep but the sleeping bag still warm. He crouched beside it, Garmin GPS reading 47.8594 dgan, 123.9351 dgw, exactly where the coordinates from Connor Burke's last check-in had placed him. The Hoh rainforest stretched in every direction, Sitka spruce rising like cathedral pillars into mist, so thick it seemed to have substance. Water dripped from everything, moss, branches, the brim of David's ranger hat. The sound created a constant white noise that should have been soothing, but instead felt deliberately masking. 3 years of working this section of Olympic National Park had taught David to read scenes like text. Burke's pack leaned against a nearby nurse log, contents organized with military precision. First aid kit, water purification tablets, freeze-dried meals, still sealed. The man's hiking boots sat beside the tent's entrance, laces tied, no mud tracked inside. Everything suggested someone who'd bedded down for the night with every intention of waking up. Except the sleeping bag was still warm, and it was 3:47 p.m. David pressed his hand against the nylon fabric again, confirming what his gut already knew. Heat radiated through the material, the kind of warmth a human body generated. He'd received the call about Burke's overdue return at noon, the man's girlfriend reporting he should have been back in Port Angeles by 9 a.m. That meant at least 6 hours since anyone expected contact, probably longer. Burke? David's voice barely carried above the dripping forest. Connor Burke, this is Olympic National Park Ranger. If you can hear me, make yourself known. Silence, except for water finding new paths down ancient bark. David keyed his Motorola radio. Base, this is Ramirez at the Hoh River Trail, mile marker 7, located Burke's campsite. Tent secured, gear present, no sign of occupant. Sleeping bag still retains body heat. Requesting backup for area search. Static answered, then dispatcher Chen's voice. Copy that, David. Thermal anomaly noted. Be advised, closest unit is Patterson, currently at Bogachil. ETA, 45 minutes. Do you want to wait for backup before proceeding? David studied the tree line. The afternoon light, already dim beneath the canopy, seemed to be fading faster than it should. His watch read, 3:52 p.m. Sunset wouldn't come for another 3 hours, but the forest's perpetual twilight made time feel negotiable. Negative. Starting preliminary search now. Burke's been missing too long to wait. I'll maintain radio contact every 15 minutes. He should wait. Protocol demanded it. 3 years ago, David would have waited. But 3 years ago, he'd waited for backup while his partner Marcus went into the backcountry alone, and Marcus never came back. They'd found his body 8 days later, 20 feet from a maintained trail. Exposure and dehydration the official cause. The unofficial cause, the one David carried in his chest like a stone, was that David had waited when he should have moved. Burke's boots bothered him. Who took off their boots and then left their tent without putting them back on? The ground here was soft with decades of decomposition, but still, roots, stones, fallen branches. Walking barefoot would be painful and slow. David circled the campsite in expanding rings, eyes scanning for tracks. The forest floor was a tapestry of moss and ferns, everything perpetually damp. Finding footprints should have been easy. Instead, he found nothing. No compressed vegetation, no disturbed moss, no indication anyone had walked away from this spot in any direction. Except, 30 feet from the tent, David noticed a cluster of sword ferns bent at unnatural angles, as if something had pressed through them horizontally rather than stepping on them. He knelt, examining the pattern. The fronds were crushed, but not broken. Their resilient structure holding the shape of whatever had passed through. The pattern suggested something wider than a person, lower to the ground, moving parallel to the earth. An animal? Black bears were common in the Hoh, but they didn't move like this. Besides, Burke's food had been properly secured in a bear canister, untouched. David stood, following the trail of disturbed ferns. They led deeper into the forest, away from the maintained trail, into sections where old growth dominated and human presence became theoretical. His boots sank slightly with each step, releasing the rich smell of decay and rebirth that characterized the rainforest. Somewhere above, a varied thrush called, 3 descending notes that sounded like a question. Then it stopped mid-phrase. The forest's ambient noise, the constant drip, the whisper of wind through needles, the distant rush of the Ho River, seemed dim. David stopped walking, listening. Nothing had changed and everything had changed. The quality of silence felt deliberate, as if something had pressed mute on the world. His radio crackled. "David, this is Base. 15-minute check-in." "Copy, Base. Following possible trail southeast from campsite. Still no sign of Burke. Terrain becoming more difficult." "Roger that. Patterson says he's making good time. Should be there by 4:30. David continued forward. The disturbed ferns led to a break in the undergrowth where massive root systems created a natural archway. He ducked through it and found himself in a small clearing he'd never seen before, despite supposedly knowing every square mile of his assigned section. The clearing was wrong. Everything about it violated the forest's usual patterns. The moss grew in concentric circles, perfect geometric precision that nature rarely achieved. The trees surrounding the space were all the same species, western hemlock, and all appeared to be the same age, their trunks identical in circumference. In a forest characterized by diversity and chaos, this uniformity felt staged. In the center of the clearing stood a single Douglas fir, dead but still standing, its bark stripped away to reveal wood so smooth it seemed polished. Carved into the trunk were symbols David didn't recognize. Not the casual graffiti of hikers, but something older, more deliberate. The cuts were weathered, decades old at least, yet the exposed wood showed no rot. David approached the tree, pulling out his phone to photograph the symbols. The screen showed no signal, expected this deep in the forest, but when he tried to activate the camera, the phone simply died. Full battery to black screen in a second. "Christ," he muttered, shaking the device. Nothing. He stuffed it back in his pocket and pulled out his backup, a small digital camera specifically for field documentation. He raised it to photograph the carved tree. Through the viewfinder, he saw them, figures, standing between the trees at the clearing's edge. Dozens of them, motionless, watching. He jerked the camera down, heart suddenly pounding. The clearing appeared empty. He looked through the viewfinder again. There they were, unmistakable. Dark silhouettes, human-shaped but somehow not quite right. Too tall, too thin, proportions slightly off. David lowered the camera slowly. His training said there was a rational explanation. Heat distortion, lens malfunction, artifacts from the mist. But his hindbrain, the part that had kept humans alive through millions of years of being prey, screamed at him to run. Instead, he keyed his radio. "Base, this is Ramirez. I've located a clearing about a quarter-mile southeast of Burke's campsite. I'm observing anomalies. Requesting immediate backup." Static. He tried again. "Base, do you copy?" More static, but underneath it, David heard something else. A whisper, rhythmic and repetitive, like words in a language he couldn't quite place. He twisted the radio's frequency dial. The whisper followed him across every channel. Movement in his peripheral vision made him spin. Nothing. But now the quality of light had changed again. The clearing seemed darker, though his watch insisted only 5 minutes had passed. The mist had thickened, individual droplets hanging suspended in air, defying gravity. "Burke," David called, his voice swallowed by the abnormal quiet. "Connor Burke." A sound answered, not from any direction, but from everywhere at once. Footsteps, but wrong. Too many feet moving in perfect synchronization, creating a rhythm that was almost musical. They grew closer without any visible source. David's hand went to the canister of bear spray on his belt. a gesture he immediately recognized as absurd. Whatever this was, capsaicin wouldn't stop it. The footsteps ceased. In the silence that followed, David became aware of his own breathing, ragged and too fast. His mouth tasted like copper. His hands were shaking. Then he saw it, a shadow moving independently of any light source. It flowed across the ground like liquid, darker than the surrounding dimness approaching from the tree line. As it came closer, David realized it wasn't moving along the ground. It was moving through it, existing in some space that overlapped, but didn't quite align with reality. The shadow rose, taking three-dimensional form. Humanoid but stretched, elongated as if someone had taken a person's silhouette and pulled it upward like taffy. Where a face should have been, there was nothing. Just absence, a void that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. David's legs told him to run. His ranger training told him to document, to observe, to maintain rational thought. He managed to raise the camera again, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. Through the viewfinder, the clearing was filled with them. Dozens of shadow figures, all motionless except for that subtle, impossible movement, like they existed in a slightly different time frame, their motion lagging behind reality by a fraction of a second. One stood directly in front of him, close enough that he should have been able to touch it, close enough that the temperature dropped 15 degrees. His breath suddenly visible. It didn't breathe. It didn't move. It simply was. An existence that felt fundamentally wrong, a violation of natural law. David's throat closed. He tried to speak, to move, to do anything, but his body refused to obey. The paralysis wasn't physical. He could feel his muscles tense, ready to act. But something else held him in place. Some force that existed in the space between thought and action. The shadow figure tilted its head, a gesture so human it made everything else about it more horrifying. Then it reached out, not toward David, but toward the camera. As its form intersected the viewfinder's field of view, the screen went black. The paralysis broke. David stumbled backward, dropping the camera, and suddenly the forest rushed back to life. Sound returned, water dripping, wind moving, birds calling. The clearing appeared normal, just another small gap in the ancient forest. Empty except for the carved tree and his dropped camera. He snatched up the camera and ran. Behind him he heard those footsteps again, that synchronized rhythm that no natural thing could make. They didn't pursue exactly. They followed, maintaining the same distance no matter how fast David moved. He crashed through undergrowth, ignoring proper trail protocols, his only thought to reach Burke's campsite, to reach anything familiar. A root caught his boot, and David went down hard, hands scraping across rough bark. He rolled onto his back, expecting to see the shadow figures looming over him. Nothing. The forest looked completely ordinary. His radio crackled back to life. "Ramirez, this is base. Do you copy? David, we've lost your signal for the last 20 minutes. Please respond." 20 minutes? David checked his watch. 4:35 p.m. He'd entered the clearing at 3:58. 37 minutes, not 20. His watch and base's timeline didn't match. "Base, this is Ramirez. I copy. I'm returning to Burke's campsite now. My equipment is malfunctioning. I'm experiencing..." What was he experiencing? How did you report this? "Technical difficulties. Requesting Patterson's ETA." "Patterson is at the campsite now, David. Where are you?" David looked around, trying to orient himself. Every direction looked identical, massive trees and hanging moss and perpetual mist. His GPS was dead, like his phone. The compass on his watch spun lazily, unable to find north. "I'm southeast of the campsite. Give me 10 minutes." He stood, choosing a direction based purely on instinct, and started walking. After 5 minutes, he found a familiar landmark, a nurse log shaped like a bent elbow that he'd used for navigation before. Burke's campsite should be 300 yards northwest. He found it in 2 minutes, which was impossible given his walking speed. Ranger Patterson stood beside Burke's tent, examining the sleeping bag. "David, you look like hell. What happened out there?" David opened his mouth and closed it again. Patterson was old school, 25 years with the Park Service. a man who believed in procedure and evidence and rational explanation. How could David explain what he'd seen? What he'd felt? "I found a clearing," he said finally. "About a quarter-mile south. There are symbols carved into a tree. Old, maybe historic native significance. I think Burke might have been there." "You think, or you know?" "I found a trail leading in that direction, but I lost it." Patterson studied him with the kind of look that suggested he was evaluating more than David's words. "Your hands are shaking. It's cold." "It's 60 degrees. David looked down at his hands. They were shaking, violent tremors he couldn't control. "I need water." He sat heavily on a fallen log, pulling out his water bottle. His phone was still dead. He tried turning it on repeatedly, some part of his brain unable to accept that it had simply died at full battery. The camera's screen was cracked, the lens showing a spiderweb fracture, but when he reviewed the stored images, they showed nothing but dark blur. "David." Patterson's voice had softened. "When's the last time you took time off?" "I'm fine." "You're not, and that's okay. After what happened with Marcus, don't." David's voice came out harder than he intended. "This isn't about Marcus. There's something wrong out there. Something wrong with this forest. The forest is 500 square miles of wilderness. Things get strange when you're alone out here. Your mind plays tricks. I know what I saw." "What did you see?" David met his eyes. "Shadows, moving on their own. Figures that shouldn't exist." Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pack and pulled out a folder. "Base asked me to bring you this. Reports from the last 6 months. 4 hikers reported seeing similar things in the Hoh backcountry. All of them were alone. All of them were experienced. All of them said the same thing. Shadows that moved independently, figures at the edge of vision. And they were all fine. They got spooked, they left, they wrote reports that got filed under environmental stress. This forest does things to your head, David. The constant mist, the dim light, the isolation. It creates pareidolia. You see patterns where none exist. The symbols on that tree aren't pareidolia. They're real, physical marks. Then we'll investigate them tomorrow in daylight with a full team. Right now we need to focus on finding Connor Burke." Patterson gestured to the tent. "Help me search his belongings. Maybe there's something that indicates where he went." They worked in methodical silence, cataloging Burke's possessions. Everything was normal. A 28-year-old engineering student from Seattle here for a solo hiking trip. His journal contained entries about trail conditions, wildlife sightings, meditation on being alone in nature. Nothing suggested distress or unusual observations, until David found the last entry dated yesterday evening. "The trees are watching. I know how that sounds. I'm an engineer, I deal in facts, measurable phenomena, but I can feel it. There's an intelligence in this forest that has nothing to do with animals. I keep seeing movement in my peripheral vision, but when I look directly, nothing is there. My camera won't work properly. Neither will my phone, even though I charged both fully yesterday. The compass is acting strange too. It keeps pointing to that dead tree in the clearing I found this morning, the one with the symbols. I should leave, but I can't. Not yet. I need to understand what those marks mean. I've been photographing them, trying different angles, different light conditions. In some photos, I swear I can see." The entry ended there, mid-sentence. The pen's final mark, a jagged line across the page. "Clearing with symbols," Patterson said quietly. "The one you found?" "Must be. Burke saw the same things I did." David flipped through the journal's remaining pages. All blank except for one. The final page, where Burke had sketched the symbols from the tree. Looking at the drawing made David's eyes hurt, the lines seeming to shift and rearrange themselves when he wasn't looking directly at them. Beneath the drawing, Burke had written a single word in shaky handwriting. "Watchers." Patterson's radio crackled. "Base to all units, be advised we have a second missing person report. Female hiker Rachel Morrison reported overdue from Hoh River Trail. Last known position approximately mile marker 6. Vehicle confirmed in parking lot untouched for 2 days. David and Patterson locked eyes. Mile marker 6 was less than a mile from where they stood. 2 disappearances in 2 days, David said. Same trail. And you want to tell me this is just environmental stress? I want to tell you that we follow protocol and we don't jump to conclusions. But Patterson's voice lacked conviction. He was looking at the sketch in Burke's journal at the word watchers, and David could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. We need to check that clearing, David said. Tonight, whatever took Burke might still be there. Or whatever took him might take us too. Then we go prepared. We bring proper equipment, backup batteries, redundant communication systems. David, it's already getting dark. We should... A sound cut through the forest, sharp, piercing, unmistakably human. A scream coming from the southeast, from the direction of the clearing. Both rangers moved simultaneously, muscle memory overriding hesitation. They ran toward the sound, radios already calling for emergency support, training taking over. The scream came again, closer now, raw with terror. David crashed through the undergrowth, Patterson close behind. They burst into a small ravine and found her. Rachel Morrison, they assumed, though she barely looked human. She cowered beneath an overhang, hands over her face, rocking back and forth. Her clothing was shredded, skin covered in scratches. But the wounds were wrong. They ran vertically, perfect parallel lines, as if something with very long fingers had stroked her arms and legs. Rachel? Rachel Morrison? Patterson approached slowly, hands visible. We're park rangers. You're safe now. Can you hear me? She looked up, and David saw that her pupils were fully dilated, irises reduced to thin rings. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. They're still here, can't you see them? They're all around us. They've been here the whole time, watching, waiting. We built our cities and our roads and we thought we owned the world, but they were here first. They'll be here after. They're not leaving. They're collecting. Collecting what? David asked. Rachel's laugh was high and broken. Shadows. They're collecting shadows. Every person who comes here, they take a piece. That's why you can't find the others. They're not missing, they're becoming. Patterson pulled out a thermal blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders despite her resistance. Rachel, have you seen Connor Burke? A male hiker, late 20s? The man with the camera. He tried to photograph them, stupid. You can't capture shadow with light. It makes them angry. She grabbed David's arm suddenly, grip surprisingly strong. You saw them too, I can tell. It's in your eyes now, that knowing. You'll never stop seeing them. Every shadow, every dark corner, every time you're alone, you'll wonder if they're there. And they will be. David pulled back, but her words burrowed under his skin. Because she was right. Even now, in the ravine's fading light, he could see movement at the edge of his vision. Shapes that didn't belong, existing in the space between what was and what couldn't be. We need to evacuate, Patterson said, his usual confidence cracking. Get her to medical, report back to base and what? Rachel interrupted. Pretend this isn't happening? Pretend the forest isn't full of things that shouldn't exist? They've been taking people for decades, not many, just enough that it doesn't show a pattern. The Park Service buries it under exposure, wildlife attacks, falls. Anything but the truth. What truth? David asked, though part of him didn't want to know. That we're not alone. That we've never been alone. There are things older than us. Things that exist in the spaces we can't see. The native tribes knew. That's why they marked those trees. Why they had rituals to keep the watchers satisfied. But we forgot. We stopped believing. And now they're hungry. Patterson tried his radio. Static, thick and heavy, with that same underlying whisper David had heard before. He tried different channels. All the same. David, how far are we from the main trail? David pulled out his compass. The needle spun in useless circles. His GPS was still dead. Every electronic device they carried was malfunctioning simultaneously. I don't know, he admitted. Everything's dead. Then we navigate by landmarks. We move north toward the river, Follow it downstream to the ranger station. We don't stop. We don't investigate, we just move. But which way was north? In the failing light beneath the endless canopy, every direction looked identical. David tried to remember their approach angle, the position of the sun, anything that could orient them. Nothing helped. This way, he said, choosing based purely on instinct. They helped Rachel to her feet. She moved like a sleepwalker, compliant but absent, as if she'd left something fundamental behind in wherever she'd been for the past 2 days. As they walked, David became aware of the sound again. Those synchronized footsteps, that impossible rhythm. They were being followed. Patterson heard it too. His hand went to his bear spray, a gesture that would have been reassuring if either of them believed it would help. The footsteps grew closer, not pursuing exactly, but herding. David realized with sick certainty that they weren't choosing their direction. They were being guided, pushed toward something. Every time they tried to change course, the footsteps would intensify on that side, forcing them back. After 20 minutes of walking, or maybe it was an hour, time had become slippery. They emerged into the clearing, the one with the carved tree. David had known they would end up here. On some level, he'd known since finding Burke's empty tent. The symbols on the tree were glowing, faint bioluminescence, the kind certain fungi produced, except this was wrong. The light pulsed with that same rhythm as the footsteps, like a heartbeat, like breathing, and around the clearing, standing between every tree, the shadow figures waited. Patterson saw them this time. No camera needed, no special equipment. They were simply there, dozens of them, tall and terrible and patient. David heard Patterson's breath catch, heard him whisper something that might have been a prayer or might have been a curse. "They want us to see them," Rachel said quietly. "That's the first step. Seeing, then believing, then understanding, then becoming." One of the figures moved forward, that liquid motion that defied physics. As it approached the center of the clearing where the 3 humans stood huddled together, David could make out more details. It wasn't exactly without form. It had shape, structure, even something like features. But they were features designed to mock humanity, to show what people might look like if you removed everything that made them real and left only the shadow cast by their existence. The figure stopped 10 feet away. David felt that same paralysis beginning to grip him, that force that existed between thought and action. Beside him, Patterson had gone rigid, only his eyes moving. Rachel simply stared, tears streaming down her face. "Burke," David managed to force out. "Connor Burke. Where is he?" The shadow figure tilted its head, that gesture again, so human and so wrong. Then it gestured toward the carved tree. As it did, the bark seemed to ripple, becoming translucent. David could see inside the tree now, see its hollow interior, see the figure standing within. Connor Burke, or what remained of him. His body was present but somehow empty, as if something fundamental had been removed. He stood perfectly still, arms at his sides, eyes open but unseeing. Around him, inside the tree, David could see others. Dozens of hollow figures arranged in perfect geometric precision, all standing, all waiting. "Oh God," Patterson breathed. "How many?" The shadow figure made a sound. Not quite speech, not quite music, something that resonated in David's chest rather than his ears. The other figures around the clearing took it up, creating a harmony that shouldn't have been possible. And David understood with horrible clarity what Rachel had meant. They weren't killing people. They were collecting them, adding them to something, some vast consciousness that existed in the spaces between. Burke was still alive, technically. His body still functioned. But his self, his consciousness, his shadow, whatever made him Connor Burke, had been integrated into something else. The carved tree wasn't marking territory. It was a door. And Burke had opened it by trying to photograph what shouldn't be seen, by refusing to look away, by insisting that rational explanation existed for the impossible. The shadow figures began to move closer, that synchronized motion creating a tightening circle. David's paralysis was complete now. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Beside him, Patterson made a sound like a trapped animal. Rachel had stopped crying. She was smiling. "It doesn't hurt," she whispered. "When they take you, it's almost peaceful, like falling asleep, like finally understanding the joke everyone else has been telling your whole life." David's vision was darkening at the edges. Not unconsciousness, something worse. He was becoming aware of something vast and cold and patient, a presence that existed beneath consensus reality. It had been here long before humans walked upright. It would remain long after the last human drew their final breath. They were the watchers, the observers, the ones who stood in shadows because shadows were their only language, and they were tired of being unseen. In his final moment of coherent thought, David understood what the Park Service had been covering up, what the native warnings had tried to communicate, what Burke and Rachel and all the others had discovered too late. The forest wasn't haunted, it was awake, and it had been watching humanity's brief flicker of existence with something that might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. The darkness took him, but it didn't take him away. That was the horror of it. David remained conscious, aware, but no longer David. He became part of the pattern, another node in a vast network of collected consciousness. He could feel the others, Burke, Rachel, dozens more stretching back decades, all still present, all still aware, all trapped in that space between existence and memory. His body, now empty, joined the others inside the hollowed tree, and the shadow figures, having claimed another piece of humanity, retreated back into their patient watching. When the search and rescue team found Ranger David Ramirez 3 days later, he was standing in a small clearing deep in the Hoh backcountry. His eyes were open. His vital signs were normal, but when they spoke to him, tried to get him to respond, to move, to show any sign of consciousness, there was nothing. The medical examiner in Port Angeles had no explanation. Brain activity showed normal patterns. There was no physical trauma, no toxins in his system, no evidence of exposure or dehydration. David Ramirez was, by every measurable standard, alive and healthy. He just wasn't there anymore. They found Connor Burke the same day, standing in the same clearing in the same state. Rachel Morrison was discovered 20 feet away, her smile still fixed on her absent face. The Park Service called it a shared psychotic episode, possibly triggered by environmental factors unique to the Hoh rainforest's unusual atmospheric conditions. The families were given that explanation along with closed caskets, though the bodies inside were technically still alive. The clearing was marked as hazardous terrain and removed from all official maps. The carved tree was scheduled for removal, but the work crew reported equipment malfunctions and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The project was quietly abandoned. Ranger Patterson requested immediate transfer to a different park. His request cited personal reasons, but those who read his final report noted his description of the Hoh backcountry. There are places in the forest where reality has different rules. We mark them on maps, we name them, we act like we understand them, but we don't. We never have. And something in those places knows it. The report was filed. Patterson was transferred. The Park Service sent out a memo about stress management and mandatory therapy for rangers working isolated posts. And in the Hoh rainforest, in a clearing no one visits anymore, shadows continue their patient watching. The carved tree stands silent, its hollow interior home to a growing collection of bodies that breathe but do not live, waiting, as they have always waited, for the next person who refuses to look away. Because the forest is awake, and once you see its watchers, they see you back, and they never stop watching. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The boot prints changed species halfway across the sandstone. Robert Fitzgerald had been staring at them for 3 minutes, crouched in the rust-colored dust with his Garmin E-Trex GPS unit dangling from his belt, when he finally accepted what his eyes were telling him. The prints started as standard Vasquez hiking boots. He recognized the distinctive waffle pattern from the missing person report, then mid-stride, without break or deviation, became something else. Not bear, not cougar. Something with 5 digits that spread too wide, with claws that scored the rock in ways that made his mouth go dry. He'd been in Canyonlands for exactly 11 days. Transfer from Olympic National Park, where he'd spent 8 years navigating temperate rainforest and dealing with lost day hikers who underestimated the terrain. Utah was supposed to be a fresh start after the divorce, a chance to prove he could adapt, excel anywhere the Park Service sent him. The high desert of southeastern Utah was alien territory. No moss-draped cedars, no constant drip of rainfall, just endless sky pressing down on sandstone bones that had been here since before humans learned to walk upright. The locals in Moab had been polite but distant when he'd introduced himself at the ranger station, their eyes carrying that particular wariness reserved for outsiders who didn't understand how the desert could kill you in a dozen ways before sunset. Ashley Nguyen had gone missing 4 days ago. 28 years old, experienced backpacker from Denver, permits filed properly for a 3-day solo trek through the Needles district. Her car sat in the Squaw Flat campground lot, registration current, emergency contact information filled out in neat handwriting. She'd checked in with the ranger station on October 12th at 2:47 p.m., mentioned she was heading toward Chesler Park via the joint trail, planned to camp at Devil's Pocket, standard route. She should have been back by the 15th. It was now October 17th, 2007, and Robert was following tracks that violated every principle of mammalian locomotion he'd learned in his wildlife biology degree. The morning had started at 5 a.m. with bitter coffee and a briefing from Chief Ranger Tom Vega, a sun-weathered man in his 50s who'd worked Canyonlands for 23 years. Needles District's a labyrinth, Vega had said, spreading a topographic map across the scarred table. Cedar Mesa sandstone carved into fins and spires, easy to get disoriented even with GPS. We've got 2 teams working the main trails, but someone needs to check the backcountry. He'd looked at Robert with something that might have been sympathy. You're the newest Fitzgerald. You get the remote sectors. Robert had nodded, gathered his gear. Motorola 2-way radio with 12-hour battery life, 3 liters of water, first aid kit, emergency beacon, compass that didn't rely on satellites. The radio crackled with occasional check-ins from the other teams, voices thin and distant across the maze of stone. By 9 a.m. he was 6 miles from the trailhead, following a drainage that cut between sandstone walls streaked with desert varnish, the black and rust staining left by millennia of mineral deposits. That's when he'd found the first cairn. Not the official trail markers maintained by the Park Service. Those were standardized stacks of 3 flat rocks. This was different. 7 stones balanced in a configuration that seemed deliberately wrong, the top rock much larger than those supporting it, defying physics in a way that made him stop and study it from multiple angles. The stones were cold to the touch despite the climbing sun. Around the base, scratched into the sandstone with something sharp, were symbols he didn't recognize. Not petroglyphs. Those were ancient, protected, documented. These were fresh, the exposed stone still lighter than the surrounding surface. He'd photographed the symbols with his digital camera, a Nikon Coolpix that would become useless once the batteries died, and continued tracking. The boot prints led him northwest, away from established trails toward an area marked on his map as extreme backcountry. No maintained routes. The Needles District was named for the spires of Cedar Mesa sandstone that rose like fingers from the earth, and here they crowded together in a forest of stone, creating passages barely wide enough for a human body. Ashley's tracks were clear in the sand trapped between rock formations, purposeful, evenly spaced, the gait of someone who knew where she was going. Then the transformation. Robert stood up, feeling his knees protest, and followed the changed prints. They continued in the same direction, same purposeful stride, but now they were something that shouldn't exist outside fever dreams. The stride length was wrong, longer than human, shorter than bear, suggesting something that moved with a loping efficiency that covered ground faster than running. Every 10 feet or so the prints changed again. Dog, coyote, something with hooves. Back to the 5-fingered things with claws. His radio hissed static. He pulled it from his belt. "Base, this is Fitzgerald, you copy?" More static, then a fragment of voice. "Weak signal, position?" 6 miles northwest of Squaw Flat, coordinates. He read the numbers from his GPS. Found tracks. Request additional. The signal dissolved into electronic noise. He was too deep in the stone maze. Too many walls between him and the relay tower. Standard for Needles backcountry. He'd check in when he worked his way back to higher ground. The sun climbed toward noon, turning the sandstone into a griddle that radiated heat from every surface. Robert's shadow contracted beneath him as he followed the changing tracks, deeper into the labyrinth. The formations here had names on the map: Elephant Hill, Druid Arch, Chesler Park, but they felt inadequate for the alien landscape pressing in from all sides. This was Cedar Mesa sandstone from the Permian period, 250 million years old, formed when this land was a coastal dune system. The individual grains of sand had been compressed into stone before dinosaurs walked, before flowering plants evolved, before anything remotely human existed. The tracks led him to a pour-over, a 15-foot drop where flash floods had carved a smooth channel through the rock. There were no prints on the far side, no indication of how anything had descended. Robert worked his way around, finding a crack system that allowed him to chimney down, back and feet pressed against opposing walls. His shirt caught on the stone and tore. At the bottom, he found Ashley's bandana. It was tied around a rock, the fabric faded blue with white paisley print, exactly matching the description in the missing person report. But it was tied carefully, deliberately, the knot complex and tight. Not dropped, not lost, placed. Robert's hands began to shake as he untied it. The fabric was stiff with dried blood, the amount suggesting a significant wound, but not immediately fatal. He bagged it as evidence, sealed the plastic with fingers that felt thick and clumsy, and looked around the small amphitheater where the pour-over had deposited him. More cairns, dozens of them. They ringed the space in a perfect circle, each one identical to the first. 7 stones, top-heavy, physics-defying. In the center of the circle, scratched deep into the sandstone, was a symbol that made his stomach clench. It looked like a human figure, arms and legs spread, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs bent at too many joints, the head elongated, and around it were scratch marks that could have been fur or feathers or something between. His grandmother had been Tlingit, from southeast Alaska, and she'd told him stories when he was young. Stories about things that wore human skin, but weren't human underneath. She'd made him promise never to whistle at night in the woods, never to respond if he heard his name called by a voice he didn't recognize, never to follow tracks that changed. This wasn't Tlingit territory. This was Utah, the homeland of the Ute and Navajo peoples, and he knew enough about cultural respect to understand that their stories weren't his to claim. But standing in that circle of stones, surrounded by symbols he couldn't read, looking at prints that shifted from species to species, he felt the weight of something older than the Park Service, older than the boundary lines drawn on maps. His radio erupted with sound, not static this time, but a voice. His own voice. "Base, this is Fitzgerald. Found her. Coordinates." And then his voice gave coordinates that were wrong, miles east of his actual position, leading any rescue team away from where he stood. Robert dropped the radio. It clattered against stone, still transmitting. His voice continued, calm and professional, describing a scenario that wasn't happening. Subject is injured but stable, requesting medevac to... He crushed the power button. The voice cut off mid-sentence. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no ravens croaking, no insects buzzing. Just the vast pressing quiet of the desert, and beneath it, almost too soft to hear, the sound of something breathing that wasn't him. Robert turned in a slow circle, scanning the rim of the amphitheater 30 feet above. Nothing moved. The sun was directly overhead now, eliminating shadows, turning every surface into glaring brightness that made his eyes water. But there, on the eastern rim, a shape that could have been a juniper stump or a rock formation or something standing very still, watching. He blinked. The shape was gone. His water bottle was half empty. He drank, feeling the liquid sit heavy in his stomach, and checked his GPS. The screen flickered, displaying his coordinates, then scrambling them into nonsense. He powered it off and back on. Same result. The compass on his watch spun lazily, unable to find north. Old school navigation then. He'd come down from the east, which meant the pour-over was behind him. He turned to face it, studying the walls for the crack system he'd used to descend, and found 4 different cracks, each one looking exactly right, each one positioned where he remembered climbing down. A bead of sweat ran into his eye. He wiped it away, tasting salt, and noticed his shadow. It stretched to the west now, long and thin, though the sun was still directly overhead. He looked up. The sun was where it should be, a white disk hammering down heat. He looked at his shadow again. It pointed west. In his pack, beneath the emergency supplies, he carried a small leather pouch his grandmother had given him before she died. Sage and tobacco, she'd said, for protection, for respect. He'd never opened it, had carried it more as memorial than talisman, but now he pulled it out with shaking hands and held it against his chest. "I mean no disrespect," he said aloud, his voice strange in the silence. "I'm just looking for someone. A woman named Ashley. I want to bring her home." The breathing sound intensified, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Then, from the northern rim, a voice called down, "Robert? Robert Fitzgerald? Is that you?" His own voice. Perfect imitation. The same Pacific Northwest accent, the slight hesitation on the F of his last name that he'd never been able to eliminate. He didn't answer. "Robert, I'm hurt. I fell. I need help." Still his voice, but now it carried pain, desperation. The kind of call that demanded response, that activated every instinct drilled into him during Park Service training. Render aid. No one left behind. Answer the call. His grandmother's stories came back. Never respond to your own name in an unfamiliar voice. Never respond to your own voice calling to you. "I need medical attention," his voice called from above. "I'm bleeding, please." Robert sealed the pouch and returned it to his pack. He chose the crack that felt right, not looked right, felt right, and began climbing. His fingers found holds in the sandstone, the rock warm and rough beneath his palms. Halfway up, he heard movement above him, something scrabbling across stone with too many feet, too many joints bending. He didn't look up. He climbed with eyes fixed on the rock inches from his face, breathing measured, arms burning. When he pulled himself over the rim, the thing that had been calling in his voice was gone, but it had left prints. Human feet, dog paws, something with claws, all of them leading deeper into the maze. Robert stood on the rim, 300 feet of open desert visible in every direction, and saw nothing alive. No birds, no lizards, no ants crawling on the stone. The land was empty in a way that felt deliberate, evacuated, as if every creature with sense had fled. His torn shirt flapped in a wind he couldn't feel. The fabric moved, but the sagebrush around him remained perfectly still. He turned his back on the changing tracks and headed south, toward where his map suggested the main trail should be, toward people and radios that worked and explanations that made sense. He made it 20 yards before the smell hit him. Carrion, but wrong. Meat spoiling in a way that meat shouldn't spoil, with an underlying chemical sweetness that reminded him of formaldehyde and burning hair. The smell came from ahead, from the direction of escape, growing stronger with each step. Robert stopped. Behind him, the scrabbling sound resumed, closer now. He turned. The thing stood 40 feet away, in full sunlight, making no attempt to hide. It wore Ashley Nguyen's face, not a mask, not makeup. Her actual face complete and perfect, sitting on a body that was fundamentally wrong. The torso was too long, the limbs bent backward at the elbows and knees, and it stood in a crouch that put its elongated hands flat on the stone. The hands had Ashley's fingers, her chipped purple nail polish on the thumbnails, but they spread too wide, the joints hyper-extending in ways that created angles human anatomy couldn't support. It smiled at him with Ashley's mouth, showing teeth that were hers in front but became something else farther back. Too many molars, too sharp, designed for shearing rather than chewing. "Ranger Fitzgerald," it said in Ashley's voice, the Denver accent perfect, the pitch exactly right. Thank God you found me. I thought I was going to die out here. Robert's hand dropped to his belt, feeling for the canister of bear spray he carried. His fingers closed around the plastic cylinder. I got lost, Ashley's voice continued, while the body that carried it remained in its impossible crouch, weight distributed across hands and feet like a spider. The trails all looked the same. I kept walking in circles. Then I fell and hurt my ankle. The thing lifted one foot, Ashley's foot in a Vask hiking boot, and the ankle bent completely backward, bone protruding through skin that looked painted on rather than grown. You're not her, Robert said. His voice came out steady, which surprised him. The smile widened, pulling Ashley's face in directions it wasn't meant to go. I'm exactly her. I've been her for 3 days now. I know her memories, her childhood in Denver, her job at the architectural firm, her ex-boyfriend who never understood why she needed the mountains. I know her better than she knew herself. Where is she? I am her. The thing rose up on its hind legs, on Ashley's legs, and stood swaying slightly, arms hanging too long at its sides. This is what happens when you walk where you're not wanted, when you take pictures of sacred things, when you step inside circles meant to keep others out. It gestured with Ashley's hand toward the amphitheater behind Robert. She came to this place 3 nights ago. She saw the cairns and thought they were interesting. Photographic, she stepped inside the circle and took out her camera. The thing's neck rotated farther than any human neck should rotate, letting Ashley's face regard him from an angle that made his vision blur. That's when I stepped inside her. Do you know how long I've been here, Ranger? How many seasons, how many migrations of stars? This land was mine before your people drew their lines and named their parks. Before Ashley's people crossed the ocean. Before anyone who looks like you or her existed. Robert pulled the bear spray free. I'm leaving now. I'm going to report this and they'll send teams. You can't hide. The thing that wore Ashley laughed with her lungs, and the sound echoed between the stone formations, multiplying and distorting until it came from every direction. Hide? I don't hide. I walk the trails in daylight. I wear the faces of those who trespass. Sometimes I wear them well enough to go back to the parking lots to drive away in their cars, to live their lives for weeks or months before the skin gets too tight and I need to shed it. It took a step closer. Ashley's boot print pressed into the sand, and when it lifted, the print had changed. Back to the 5-clawed thing Robert had been following. You're new here, it said conversationally. You don't know the rules yet, but you'll learn. Or you'll become another face I wear, another step. Tell me, Robert Fitzgerald from Olympic National Park, what do you look like underneath? What memories would you give me? He sprayed. The orange mist caught the thing full in the face, Ashley's face, and it screamed, not with her voice, with something deeper, older, a sound that made the sandstone hum in sympathy. It dropped to all 4s or all 6s, limbs multiplying as Robert watched, extra joints extruding from shoulders and hips, the body restructuring itself into a configuration designed for speed. Robert ran. The maze of stone formations became a blur of rust and cream colors, sandstone fingers reaching overhead, passages so narrow his shoulders scraped both walls. He heard it behind him. The scrabbling multiplied into a centipede's nightmare skitter, moving faster than anything that size should move. His lungs burned. His legs pumped mechanically, animal brain overriding conscious thought, pure mammalian panic driving him forward. He burst into an open space. Chesler Park, his panicked mind supplied. A grassland meadow surrounded by stone formations. 200 yards of exposure, no cover, and the ranger trail on the far side. He could see the cairns, the real ones, official Park Service markers leading toward civilization. Behind him, the scrabbling stopped. Robert risked a glance backward. The thing stood at the edge of the formations, half in shadow, wearing Ashley's face again but making no attempt to hide its wrong body. It didn't pursue. It simply watched, head cocked at an angle that suggested curiosity. This is mine, it called across the grassland in Ashley's voice. Everything you see, every trail, every campsite, every piece of land your employers pretend to protect. Your guests here. Remember that. Robert backed away, keeping his eyes on it, not trusting it to remain at the boundary. When he was 50 yards into the park, he turned and ran for the trail cairns. The thing didn't follow. He made it to the Squaw Flat trailhead at sunset, emerging from the stone maze to find 2 search teams preparing for a night operation. Chief Ranger Vega took one look at his face and called for medical evaluation. Robert's shirt was torn, his arms covered in scratches from the stone, his water completely gone. He was dehydrated, borderline hypothermic despite the day's heat, his core temperature having dropped as the sun descended. "Did you find her?" Vega asked. Robert opened his pack and pulled out the sealed bag containing Ashley's bandana. "Blood," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Found this at coordinates." He consulted his notebook, which had remained functional when all his electronics failed. He gave the location of the amphitheater. Vega nodded, professional mask in place, but Robert saw something in his eyes. Recognition. Understanding. The wariness the locals had shown him wasn't about him being an outsider to Utah. It was about him being an outsider to something older. "We'll send a team at first light," Vega said. "You did good work, Fitzgerald. Get some rest." That night in the ranger housing at the edge of the park, Robert lay awake and listened to footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, measured steps that approached his window, then stopped. Through the thin curtain, he saw a silhouette. It stood there for a long time, completely motionless in a way no living thing could maintain. Then it raised one hand and waved. The gesture was friendly, casual, exactly how he would wave to a colleague. The silhouette walked away and the footsteps changed cadence. Walk, lope, 4-legged sprint, silence. In the morning, the search team found the amphitheater with its circle of cairns. They found the symbols scratched into the stone. They found scattered equipment. A Nikon camera with the memory card destroyed. A sleeping bag torn open. Hiking boots placed neatly side by side. They found blood, enough to indicate major trauma. They never found Ashley Nguyen. Robert Fitzgerald requested transfer 6 weeks later. The Park Service approved it without question. Canyonlands had a high turnover rate among new rangers, everyone said. The isolation got to people. He was assigned to Acadia National Park in Maine, where the forests were dense and wet and familiar, where the trees blocked the sky instead of the sky crushing down on exposed stone. He never told anyone what he saw, not in official reports, not in the counseling sessions the Park Service required. He described getting lost, dehydration, possible heat exhaustion causing hallucinations. Everyone nodded and accepted it. The desert did that to people, they said. But he kept his grandmother's pouch with him, sage and tobacco wrapped in leather. And he never responded when he heard his name called by a voice he didn't recognize. And sometimes checking trail cameras for wildlife, he would find frames that showed nothing but felt wrong. A space of empty trail where the grass bent under invisible weight, where the light seemed to bend around something that wasn't there, where if you looked very carefully at the shadows you could see extra limbs, extra joints, faces that didn't belong to any species in the field guide. In December 2007, a woman matching Ashley Nguyen's description checked into a hotel in Grand Junction, Colorado. She paid cash, provided ID that passed initial inspection, and stayed for 3 nights. The hotel staff remembered her as quiet, polite. She kept the curtains drawn. She didn't order room service. On the 4th day, housekeeping found the room empty except for a pile of clothes arranged in an oddly neat fashion, and a smell like meat left too long in the sun. The clothes were Ashley's. The DNA recovered from the fabric matched samples from her apartment in Denver. The case remained open. Officially, Ashley Nguyen was still classified as missing, but in the filing cabinets at Canyonlands National Park, in a folder that accumulated similar reports dating back decades, there was a note in Chief Ranger Vega's handwriting. Do not send inexperienced personnel into the Needles backcountry alone. Do not send anyone who hasn't heard the stories. Some places were never ours to manage. And in the Needles district, the cairns remained. 7 stones, top-heavy, physics-defying. Rangers on patrol learned to recognize them, learned to photograph them from a distance, learned never to step inside the circles they marked. The symbols scratched into the stone were documented, analyzed, compared to petroglyphs and historical records, and found to match nothing in any database. But the Navajo Rangers who worked the park, and the Ute liaisons from the local tribes, they knew. They'd always known. They nodded when they saw the reports, and sometimes, when the wind came from the right direction, carrying smells that shouldn't exist in the high desert, they would burn sage and speak prayers in languages older than English, older than Spanish, languages that knew the true names of things that walked in stolen skins. The land remembers. The stone remembers. And somewhere in the maze of Cedar Mesa sandstone, something that wore many faces watched the trails, patient and eternal, waiting for the next person who would step where they shouldn't step, who would take what shouldn't be taken, who would ignore the warnings written in symbols they couldn't read. Robert Fitzgerald never returned to Utah, but sometimes, in the dense forests of Maine, he would find tracks that changed species mid-stride. He would find cairns that shouldn't exist. He would hear his own voice calling from distances too far for sound to travel. And he would remember the thing in the stone maze, wearing Ashley's face, telling him, "This is mine. Everything you see, your guests here." On quiet nights, when the wind moved through the spruce and pine, he wondered how many park rangers had seen what he'd seen. How many had reports filed away in folders marked with warnings? How many had learned that the land they were supposed to protect was protecting itself in ways that had nothing to do with conservation biology or visitor management or any of the principles taught in training? The wilderness was not empty. It had never been empty. And the things that lived there, that had always lived there, were not wildlife to be cataloged and managed. They were older than management, older than civilization, older than the distinction between myth and reality. Robert kept his grandmother's pouch close. He never whistled at night. He never responded to voices he didn't recognize. And when he found tracks that changed, he photographed them, documented them, and quietly reported them to the few other rangers who understood, who had their own stories, their own encounters with things that shouldn't exist but did. Because the wilderness keeps its secrets, and sometimes the secrets walk out wearing borrowed faces, carrying borrowed memories, living borrowed lives until the skin gets too tight and they need to hunt again. The files accumulated. The warnings were passed down. The stories were told in whispers. And in Canyonlands, the cairns waited. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Robert Fitzgerald had tracked mountain lions for 15 years. He knew what their kills looked like. This wasn't one. The coyote lay 20 yards from the Hidden Valley trailhead, split open with surgical precision. No teeth marks, no claw patterns. The organs had been removed and arranged in a half circle around the carcass. Liver, heart, kidneys, lungs, each placed deliberately, almost ceremonially. The stomach was missing entirely. Robert crouched beside the scene, his knees protesting the movement. 42 years old and his body reminded him daily. He pulled the Motorola radio from his belt, thumb hovering over the transmit button, then stopped. What would he say? He'd filed incident reports for 15 years at Joshua Tree. Mountain lion attacks, heat exhaustion, lost hikers, rock climbing accidents. Never anything like this. The October sun hammered down despite the early hour, 7:15 a.m. and already pushing 80 degrees. The Mojave didn't care about seasons. Robert's Park Service uniform was already dark with sweat across his shoulders. He stood slowly, scanning the boulder formations that gave this section its name. Hidden Valley stretched out in a rough oval, enclosed by Monza granite formations that had drawn rock climbers since the 1950s. He knew every route, every anchor point, every place someone could get themselves killed through stupidity or bad luck, but he'd never seen anything get killed like this. His radio crackled. "Fitzgerald, you copy? Jenny Ortega, dispatch?" 23 years old, fresh out of training, thought every day at Joshua Tree would be Instagram-worthy sunsets and star parties. She'd learn. "Copy," Robert said. "Got a call from couple in the Jumbo Rocks campground. Said they heard screaming last night around 2 a.m., female voice. Wanted to know if we had any incidents reported." Robert looked down at the coyote, at the organs arranged just so. Negative on incidents could have been coyotes. They sound like women sometimes when they're fighting. That's what I told them. They seemed pretty shaken, though. "It's the desert. Everything sounds worse at night." Fitzgerald out. He clipped the radio back on his belt and pulled out his phone. 2008 and the damn thing still barely worked out here. No signal. He walked toward his truck, a white Ford F-250 with the Park Service logo on the door, and grabbed his digital camera from the glove box. The Nikon D40 had been a birthday present from his ex-wife 3 years ago, back when she still thought his job was romantic instead of a barrier to adult life in San Diego. Robert photographed the scene from multiple angles, zooming in on the organ arrangement. The precision nagged at him. Animals didn't do this. People did. But what kind of person drove into a national park at night to vivisect a coyote and arrange its organs in a pattern? He'd heard stories, of course. Every ranger who worked the desert long enough heard them. Devil worshippers, satanic cults, usually turned out to be bored teenagers with too much time and too many horror movies. But those cases involved pentagrams spray-painted on rocks. Maybe a chicken killed messily. Not this. Not surgical. Robert loaded the images onto his truck's laptop, one of the new rugged Panasonic Toughbooks the park had finally budgeted for. He pulled up the incident database and started typing. Location: Hidden Valley Trail, 0.2 miles from trailhead. Time discovered, 0715 hours. Description: deceased coyote, cause of death unknown, possible human involvement. His fingers paused over the keyboard. Human involvement. Was it, though? He saved the report and climbed out of the truck. The coyote needed to be bagged and removed before hikers started arriving. Robert pulled latex gloves from the emergency kit and approached the carcass again. Squatting down, he examined the incision more carefully. The cut ran from sternum to pelvis, perfectly straight. The edges were clean. Too clean for a knife. Almost cauterized. A shadow moved across the rocks to his left. Robert's head snapped up. Nothing. Just the sun shifting behind a cloud formation. Except there were no clouds. The sky stretched blue and endless, the kind of crystalline clarity that only came to the Mojave in autumn. He shook his head and reached for the coyote. His gloved fingers touched fur and something else, a texture that made him pull back instinctively. The coyote's body was cold. Not cool from the night air. Cold like it had been frozen solid and only recently thawed. But the internal organs were still warm. Robert yanked his hand back, latex snapping against his wrist. That wasn't possible, couldn't be possible. Body temperature equalized after death. Basic biology. He'd found enough deceased hikers to know the progression. The body cooled from the outside in, roughly 1.5 degrees per hour depending on ambient temperature. He pressed his palm against the coyote's flank again. Ice cold. Then touched the liver sitting 3 inches away. Heat radiated from it like it was still functioning, still pumping blood that didn't exist anymore. The radio crackled again. "Fitzgerald, we've got another call. Campers at Bell Campground reporting unusual animal sounds, specifically requesting a ranger check it out. They said..." Jenny's voice dropped to something uncomfortable. "They said it sounded like something mimicking human speech." Robert stood up fast enough to make his vision swim. "Say again?" "I know how it sounds. Woman said she heard something outside their tent around 4 a.m. making sounds like words. Her husband thinks it was just a raven. Ravens can mimic, right?" "Ravens can mimic," Robert confirmed. His mouth had gone dry. "I'll swing by after I finish here." "Copy that." "Oh, and Robert, the call about the screaming last night came from Site 23 in Jumbo Rocks. That's where Ashley Ningian is camped. The name meant nothing to him immediately. Then it clicked. The solo hiker? The one who checked in for 3 nights? Yeah. Woman traveling alone, 26 years old, from Seattle. I've got her contact info if you want to verify she's okay. Do that, Robert said. And Jenny? If you can't reach her, let me know immediately. Will do. Dispatch out. Robert looked down at the Coyote one more time. The organs were still steaming slightly in the cool morning air, impossible tendrils of vapor rising from dead tissue. He pulled an evidence bag from his truck, the kind they used for collecting human waste from illegal campsites, and forced himself to pick up the liver. The heat seared through the latex. He dropped it in the bag and sealed it quickly. The heart went next, then the kidneys, the lungs, each one impossibly warm. The Coyote's body remained frozen. By the time he finished, Robert's shirt was soaked through, not from exertion, from something else. Something that felt like his hindbrain trying to warn his frontal lobe about danger it couldn't articulate. He'd felt it once before, at 16, when he'd gone hiking in the San Bernardino Mountains and gotten separated from his youth group. That feeling of being watched by something that understood you were prey. He loaded the bagged carcass into the truck bed and drove toward Bell Campground, following the Park Boulevard loop. The road curved through the otherworldly landscape, Joshua trees standing like sentinels with their twisted arms raised, boulder formations creating impossible silhouettes against the brightening sky. He'd loved this place for 15 years. Right now it felt alien. Bell Campground sat in a valley between granite outcroppings. 43 sites, currently 21 occupied according to Jenny's morning report. Robert pulled up to Site 14 where a couple in their 50s stood beside a silver Airstream. The woman clutched a coffee mug with both hands despite the heat. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson?" Robert said, climbing out. "I'm Ranger Fitzgerald. Understand you heard something unusual." "It was talking," the woman said immediately. Her husband put a hand on her shoulder. "Margaret, we don't know." "I know what I heard, Tom." She looked at Robert with eyes that hadn't slept. "It was walking around our trailer around 4 this morning, making sounds, not animal sounds, words." "What kind of words?" Robert kept his voice level, professional. "Couldn't make them out exactly. They were wrong somehow. Like someone was speaking with a mouthful of marbles, or trying to remember how to talk." She shuddered. Tom went outside with a flashlight. The husband nodded. Didn't see anything, but there were tracks. "Show me," Robert said. Tom Patterson led him around the Airstream to the north side. The ground here was mostly sand and decomposed granite. In the beam of Robert's maglite, still necessary despite the sun because of the shadow cast by the trailer, he could see impressions in the dirt. He knelt down, studying them carefully. Coyote prints. Clear pad marks, 4 toes, claws visible. Standard Canis latrans track. They circled the trailer twice, coming close to the door. But something was wrong with the stride. Coyotes moved in a pattern. Trot, walk, run. These prints showed something else. A gait that shifted mid-circle from 4 legs to 2 legs and back again. "Did you see what made these?" Robert asked. "Like I said, nothing. By the time I got the flashlight on, whatever it was had gone. But I heard it moving through the brush toward Skull Rock." Robert stood, brushing sand from his knees. "I'll check it out. In the meantime, if you hear anything else, call dispatch immediately. Don't go outside." "You think it's dangerous?" Margaret asked. What Robert thought was that something had surgically opened a coyote, removed its organs while they were still functioning, and arranged them in a pattern. What Robert thought was that the footprints showed something switching between quadrupedal and bipedal locomotion. What Robert thought was that his 15 years of experience had just become completely useless. "Just a precaution," he said. "Wildlife can be unpredictable." He drove to the ranger station instead of Skull Rock. The building was small, built in the 1950s from the same stone as the surrounding formations, designed to blend into the landscape. Inside, the air conditioning was broken again. Susan Chen, the senior ranger, sat at her desk reviewing paperwork with a fan pointed directly at her face. "Robert," she said without looking up, Tell me you're here because you solved the mystery of who's been leaving human feces on the Cholla Cactus Trail, and not because something weird is happening. Something weird is happening, Robert said. Susan looked up. She was 58, had worked Joshua Tree for 23 years, had seen everything the desert could throw at a human being. Her expression shifted from bureaucratic exhaustion to genuine concern. Show me. Robert spread the printed photos across her desk. Susan studied them in silence, her finger tracing the arrangement of organs. When did you find this? This morning, 7:15. There's more. He explained the cold body, the warm organs, the tracks at Bell Campground. Susan listened without interrupting, a skill she'd developed from years of hearing tourists explain how they'd gotten themselves into impossible situations. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. You know what this sounds like. Don't, Robert said. You've heard the stories. Every ranger out here has. Stories aren't evidence. No, Susan agreed. But evidence is evidence. And what you're showing me doesn't make sense unless we consider options outside standard predation patterns. Robert felt something cold settle in his stomach. You're talking about skinwalkers. Susan spread her hands. I'm talking about explaining what we're seeing. The Mojave isn't Navajo territory, but the Serrano and Chemehuevi peoples have their own stories, shapeshifters, beings that violated sacred laws and gained the ability to take animal forms. The Navajo call them Yinaldlushi. The Serrano called them something else, but the concept is the same. You're telling me you believe in magic. I'm telling you I've lived in the desert long enough to know there are things science hasn't explained. And when I see tracks that show something walking on 4 legs that switches to 2 legs mid-stride, I start thinking about those stories. Susan pulled out a manila folder from her desk drawer. We've had 3 disappearances in the last 18 months. Hikers who vanished without a trace. No bodies, no evidence, nothing. National average for disappearances in wilderness areas is about 1,600 per year across all parks. Joshua Tree's portion should be maybe 2 or 3 annually. We're running high. People get lost. It's a big park. Robert, I know you're a skeptic. It's what makes you good at your job. But look at this objectively. Unexplained disappearances. Animals killed in ways that don't match any known predator. Witnesses reporting sounds and behaviors that don't fit any cataloged species. At what point do we consider alternative explanations? Robert wanted to argue. Wanted to point out that correlation wasn't causation, that unusual evidence didn't equal supernatural causes. But he thought about the frozen coyote with its still warm organs, the impossible precision of the incision, the tracks that showed something changing its form. What do I do? He asked. Susan closed the folder. Your job, check on that solo hiker, make sure people are safe, document everything. And Robert, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. Robert left the station and drove toward Jumbo Rock's campground, Site 23. The morning had turned hot, 92 degrees according to the truck's thermometer. The AC wheezed but barely made a difference. He passed a family in a minivan, their kids pressing faces against the window to watch a roadrunner dash across the pavement. Normal. Everything should be normal. Site 23 was tucked against a formation of stacked boulders that looked like they'd fall over in a strong wind but had stood for millennia. A blue 2-person tent was set up beside a rental car, a white Toyota Corolla with a Hertz sticker. No one visible. Robert parked and approached slowly. Hello? Ranger Service? Miss Nguyen? No response. The tent's zipper was open, the flap moving slightly in the hot breeze. Robert peered inside. Sleeping bag, backpack, water bottles, a paperback novel. Nothing unusual. He pulled back and scanned the area. The campsite's fire ring showed evidence of recent use. Ash still gray, not yet blown away. A pair of hiking boots sat outside the tent. Miss Nguyen? He called again, louder. Movement behind the boulders. Robert's hand went instinctively to his radio. This is Ranger Fitzgerald. If you're out there, please identify yourself. A woman emerged from between 2 rocks, maybe 30 feet away. Late 20s, Asian features, wearing hiking clothes. She walked toward him with an odd gait, her steps not quite synchronized. "I'm Ashley," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Is something wrong?" "Just checking in. We had reports of unusual sounds last night. Wanted to make sure all campers were accounted for." "I'm fine," Ashley said. She was closer now, maybe 15 feet. Robert could see her face clearly. Her expression was neutral. Too neutral. Like someone wearing a mask of a human face. "Did you hear anything unusual? Around 2 a.m.? "No," she said, still walking toward him. Her eyes were wrong, too wide, unblinking. "I slept through the night." Robert's instincts screamed. Everything about this woman's movement, her affect, her voice, it was wrong. Like watching someone who'd learned to imitate human behavior from descriptions, but had never actually been human. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you to stop there," Robert said, his hand moving to the canister of bear spray on his belt. Joshua Tree didn't have bears, but some rangers carried it anyway for mountain lions. Ashley stopped. She tilted her head at an angle that was too severe, almost 90 degrees. "Why?" "Standard protocol. Need to maintain appropriate distance." Robert keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Fitzgerald at Jumbo Rock Site 23, conducting welfare check on registered camper." Static. Then Jenny's voice, distorted and cutting in and out. "Copy. Fitzgerald. Everything. Okay?" 10-4, Robert said, not taking his eyes off Ashley. "Subject appears unharmed." Ashley smiled. It was the worst thing Robert had ever seen. The expression spread across her face like something had pulled her lips with strings, revealing too many teeth. Human teeth in the front. Something else behind them. "You found my work," she said. And the voice was different now. Deeper. Resonating from somewhere in her chest that humans didn't have resonance chambers. "The coyote, did you appreciate the precision?" Robert pulled the bear spray free. "Who are you?" "I'm Ashley Nguyen from Seattle." The thing wearing her face took a step forward. "I'm 26 years old. I work in software development. I came to Joshua Tree to hike and see the stars." Another step. "These are the things humans say. These are the words that make you comfortable." "Stay back," Robert said, raising the canister. "I've been practicing," it continued. "Wearing this shape, speaking this language. Your species makes it so easy. You see a face and a form and you trust. You believe." It gestured down at Ashley's body. She was alone, made camp by herself in the dark, called out when she heard sounds, came to investigate, so trusting, so foolish. Robert's finger hovered over the spray trigger. "What did you do to her?" "What was done to me," the thing said. "What must be done to survive. I was human once. Before the hunger. Before the winter when there was no food and we had to make choices. Choices that change you, remake you. The Serrano people knew. The Navajo knew. When you eat the flesh of your own kind, something in you breaks and reforms, you become other. That's not possible. You found the coyote. You saw the organs still living after the body died. You know possibility is wider than you believed." It took another step. Close enough now that Robert could smell it. Decay and something chemical, like formaldehyde. "The Navajo call us Yinaldlushi, those who walk on all fours. We wear the skins of beasts and take their shapes, but we remember being human. We hunger for it. That's why we hunt your kind. Not for food, for memory, for the taste of what we lost." Robert triggered the bear spray. The stream shot forward, orange mist filling the air between them. The thing didn't flinch, didn't blink. The capsaicin that would drop a 200-pound mountain lion just passed through the space where it stood, because it wasn't there anymore. Robert spun. The Ashley thing was behind him now, 10 feet away, having moved impossibly fast. Her form flickered like bad reception on an old TV. Woman, coyote, something in between. The skin of her face hung loose, revealing the skull structure beneath. Not human, not coyote. something designed to mimic both. "You can't hurt me with your tools," it said. "Your weapons, your understanding. I am old, older than your park, older than your borders and rules. I walked this desert when your kind still feared the dark for good reason." Robert ran. Pure instinct, 15 years of training evaporating in the face of something that shouldn't exist. He made it 3 steps before something slammed into his back, driving him face first into the sand. The weight was immense, far heavier than Ashley Nguyen's frame could carry. Claws dug into his shoulders. Too many claws, too long, positioned wrong for any animal he knew. "I could wear you," the voice said from above him, no longer pretending to be human. The words came out garbled, spoken by a mouth full of too many teeth. "Take your shape, walk your trails, answer your radio. No one would know until it was too late. That's how we survive. That's how we always survived." Robert twisted, managing to get his hand on the maglite at his belt. He swung backward, the heavy flashlight connecting with something solid. The weight lifted off him instantly. He scrambled to his feet, seeing the thing fully now in daylight. It was still wearing Ashley's skin like a loose coat, but the form beneath was lupine, elongated, wrong. The head was coyote-shaped but too large, the eyes positioned forward like a predator's but with human intelligence behind them. It circled him, moving on all fours with fluid grace. "You taste like fear," it said. "I remember that taste. From before." Robert's back hit his truck. The door handle pressed into his spine. He reached behind him, fumbling for the handle, never taking his eyes off the creature. It watched him with what might have been amusement. "Go ahead," it said. "Run. Drive away. Tell your people. They won't believe you. They never believe. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked." Robert yanked the door open and threw himself inside. The creature didn't pursue, just sat on its haunches, Ashley's face hanging loose around its true form, and watched him. Robert gunned the engine and reversed hard, spinning the truck around. In the rearview mirror, he saw it stand up on 2 legs, reaching up with clawed hands to pull the skin back into place. By the time he hit the main road, it looked like Ashley Nguyen again, standing alone in a campsite watching him leave. He drove, didn't know where, just drove. The radio crackled with routine traffic. A lost phone at Cap Rock, a medical issue at the visitor center, someone asking about wildflower blooms, normal park business. Robert's hands shook on the wheel. His shoulders throbbed where the claws had punctured his uniform. When he finally looked down, he saw blood seeping through the fabric. Real, physical, not hallucination or heat exhaustion. He pulled off at a turnout near Ryan Mountain and sat for 10 minutes trying to steady his breathing. The logical part of his brain offered explanations. Heat stroke, dehydration, stress-induced psychosis. 15 years was a long time to work the desert. Maybe he'd snapped, but his shoulders hurt. The coyote's organs had been warm. The tracks at Bell Campground showed something impossible. His phone buzzed. Signal had returned. A text from Jenny. "Everything okay? You've been off radio for 20 minutes. Robert stared at the message. What could he say? That Ashley Nguyen wasn't Ashley Nguyen? That something wearing her skin had attacked him? That skinwalkers were real and hunting in Joshua Tree? He texted back, "Fine, bad signal, heading back to station." He drove back slowly, taking Park Boulevard through the heart of the park. Tourists everywhere. Families photographing Joshua trees, rock climbers hauling gear toward Hidden Valley, a Girl Scout troop hiking toward Skull Rock, all of them oblivious to what shared their space. The ranger station was empty when he arrived. A note on Susan's desk. Gone to handle incident at Cottonwood Spring. Back by 1500. Robert checked his watch. Noon. 3 hours. He sat at his own desk and opened the incident report he'd started that morning. The cursor blinked in the description field. He'd typed, "Deceased coyote, cause of death unknown, possible human involvement." Human involvement. The bitter irony of the phrase made him laugh, a sound that came out wrong in the empty station. Robert deleted what he'd written and started over. This time he typed everything. The cold body and warm organs. The tracks at Bell. The thing wearing Ashley Nguyen. The attack. The claws in his shoulders. He typed for 45 minutes, documenting every detail with the precision he'd developed over 15 years of reports. When he finished, he read it back. It sounded insane, like the ranting of someone who'd spent too long in the sun. He saved it to his personal drive instead of the official database. Evidence? Maybe. Or maybe documentation of his mental breakdown. His phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. Fitzgerald, he answered. Ranger Fitzgerald, this is Ashley Nguyen. The voice was perfect. Young, professional, slightly concerned. I wanted to apologize if I seemed strange this morning. I think I was having a reaction to some medication. I've decided to cut my trip short and head back to Seattle. Just wanted to let someone know so you don't have to check on me again. Robert's blood went cold. What medication? Anxiety medication. The elevation affects it sometimes. Anyway, I'm packing up now. Should be out of the park by 2 p.m. Thank you for checking on me. She hung up before he could respond. Robert pulled up the registration database. Ashley Nguyen, Site 23, checked in for 3 nights, had paid for all 3 nights in advance. The system showed her car's license plate, her emergency contact, a Sarah Nguyen in Seattle, presumably a family member, and her cell phone number. He called it. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. Hi, this is Ashley. Leave a message. Robert hung up and tried the emergency contact. Sarah Nguyen answered on the second ring. Hello? Ms. Nguyen, this is Ranger Fitzgerald with Joshua Tree National Park. I'm calling about Ashley Nguyen. She listed you as an emergency contact. Oh God, is she okay? Did something happen? I need you to describe your sister for me. Physical description. What? Why? Please, ma'am, it's important. Okay, Ashley is 5'6", Chinese American, black hair usually in a ponytail, slim build. She has a scar on her left forearm from when we were kids. Why? What's going on? Robert's hand tightened on the phone. When did you last speak with her? 2 days ago. She called before she drove out to Joshua Tree. Said she wanted some time to think about a job offer. Ranger, please tell me what's happening. Does your sister have any medical conditions? Take any medications? No, she's healthy. Never been on anything except birth control. Sarah's voice was rising. You're scaring me. Is Ashley hurt? Robert closed his eyes. I need you to try calling her, right now. If she answers, tell her to come to the ranger station immediately. If she doesn't answer, call me back at this number. He gave her his cell. Okay? Okay, I'll call her. Robert hung up and sat in the empty station, listening to the hum of the struggling air conditioner. His phone rang 90 seconds later. It went to voicemail, Sarah said, crying now. Please tell me what's happening. I'm going to find her, Robert said. Stay by your phone. He drove back to Site 23. The white Corolla was gone. The tent was gone. The campsite looked untouched, like no one had ever been there. Robert walked the perimeter, studying the ground. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. Except, in the center of where the tent had been, someone had arranged stones in a circle. Inside the circle, drawn in the sand with a stick or a finger, was a symbol Robert didn't recognize. But he felt it looking at it, a crawling sensation like insects under his skin. He photographed it with his phone, his hand shaking badly enough that the first 3 shots were blurred. His radio crackled. All units, we have a report of a vehicle accident on Pinto Basin Road, approximately 10 miles east of the Chola Garden. White sedan left the roadway. Single occupant, status unknown. Robert ran for his truck, Pinto Basin Road. That was the route out of the park toward I-10, toward civilization, toward Seattle. He keyed his radio while driving. Dispatch, Fitzgerald responding. ETA 12 minutes. Copy, Fitzgerald. Medical is en route. He found the accident before the ambulance arrived. The white Corolla had gone off the road at a curve, rolled twice, and come to rest against a massive boulder. The driver's side was crumpled. Robert approached carefully, his bear spray in one hand, even though he knew it was useless. Ashley Nguyen was still in the driver's seat, held by her seatbelt. Her neck was bent at an angle that meant instant death. Blood covered the dashboard. The airbag had deployed but hadn't helped. Robert reached through the broken window to check for a pulse, procedure dictating he verify even though he could see she was gone. Her skin was cold, not cool. Ice cold, like it had been frozen. He pulled his hand back and looked at his palm. No blood. But there should have been blood. The amount covering the interior meant arterial spray, meant her heart had been pumping when the impact occurred. He looked at her arm, visible below her torn sleeve. No scar. The scar Sarah had mentioned from childhood. It wasn't there. Robert stepped back from the vehicle. The sun beat down. His radio crackled with the ambulance confirming arrival in 3 minutes. Tourists drove past, slowing to look at the accident, not stopping. Everything was normal. Everything was wrong. He walked around the Corolla, studying it. The damage was consistent with a rollover, except the tires. The front right tire showed claw marks, deep gouges through the rubber. Like something had crouched on the road and waited for the car to approach, then leaped onto the hood and torn the tire mid-swerve. Robert photographed everything. The claw marks. The missing scar. The impossibly cold body. Then he walked back to his truck and sat inside with the doors locked, waiting for the ambulance. Through the windshield, he could see the Corolla, could see Ashley Nguyen's body, could see her hand move, just a twitch, fingers flexing once, then still again. The ambulance arrived with 2 paramedics Robert knew, Tom and Lisa, both locals, both competent. They approached the vehicle while Robert watched from his truck, saw them check the body, saw them confer, saw them call it time of death 12:47 p.m., saw them load Ashley Nguyen onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. Robert rolled down his window as they prepared to leave. "Tom, did you notice anything unusual about the body?" Tom looked at him strangely. "Apart from being dead?" "No. Why?" "Temperature." "Cold, but some people run cold." "Shock response." "Nothing unusual." Tom paused. "Robert, you okay? You look like hell." "Long day," Robert said. After they left, he examined the Corolla again. The claw marks were still visible in the tire. He measured them with a ruler from his emergency kit. 4 grooves, each approximately 2 inches long, spaced in a pattern consistent with a paw. But the size was wrong. Too large for a coyote, too small for a mountain lion, right in between. Right where something that could shift between forms might fall. He drove back to the station. Susan was there, filling out paperwork from her Cottonwood incident. She looked up when he entered. "Heard about the accident. You responded?" "Yeah." Robert sat down heavily. "Susan, I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I've lost my mind." He told her everything. The attack, the thing wearing Ashley's skin, the phone call, the accident, the cold body with no scar. Susan listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Show me your shoulders," she said finally. Robert pulled off his uniform shirt. The puncture wounds were visible, 4 on each shoulder, spaced like claw marks, deep enough to still be bleeding slightly. Susan studied them, then pulled a first aid kit from her desk drawer. "Those need to be cleaned and dressed," she said. "Then we need to call this in." "Call in what? That skinwalkers are real? That something killed a woman and took her form? They'll think I'm crazy. They'll think we're both crazy." Susan applied antiseptic to his wounds, her touch professional. "The Serrano people have been here for thousands of years. They have stories about these things, about the people who went wrong, who crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed, about how hunger can change you into something else." She taped gauze over the punctures. "I believe you, Robert. Not because I want to, but because I've lived in this desert long enough to know it keeps secrets. So what do? We document, we warn, We protect people as best we can. Susan's face was grim. And we accept that some things can't be explained in incident reports. Some things just are. Robert spent the rest of his shift doing paperwork. The coyote incident, the welfare check, the accident response. He documented the claw marks in the tire, the missing scar, the temperature inconsistencies. He wrote it all down in clear, professional language that anyone reading would interpret as the observations of a thorough ranger. He didn't mention the skinwalker, didn't mention the attack. Those details stayed in his personal files, backed up on his laptop, stored on a flash drive he put in his glove box. Evidence, or madness, he wasn't sure which. At 6 p.m., Susan told him to go home. Robert drove his truck out of the park, past the entrance station onto the highway toward his apartment in 29 Palms. In his rearview mirror, Joshua Tree National Park stretched out in the failing light. Ancient landscape, eternal and indifferent. Something moved between the Joshua trees, keeping pace with his truck for half a mile before vanishing into the desert. Robert didn't look back again. When he got home, he locked every door and window. He took a long shower, trying to wash away the day, watching his blood circle the drain. The puncture wounds throbbed. In the mirror, they looked like exactly what they were. Claw marks from something that shouldn't exist. He ate dinner without tasting it. Tried to watch TV but couldn't focus. Finally, at 10 p.m. he gave up and went to bed. Sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made him tense. The air conditioner kicking on, the house settling, a coyote howling somewhere in the distance. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Thank you for your concern today. I made it home safely. Ashley." Robert stared at the message. Ashley Nguyen was dead. He'd seen her body, watched the paramedics load her into an ambulance, but something was using her phone. Something that had taken her form, her voice, her identity. He typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, showing someone typing. They pulsed for 30 seconds. Then, "You know who I am. You saw me, felt me. I could have killed you today, but I chose not to. Remember that. Remember that I chose to let you live. What do you want? To exist, to hunt, to remember what it was like to be human. You can't stop me. Your weapons don't work. Your laws don't apply. I am older than your understanding. I will be here long after you're gone." Robert's hand shook. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand. Because every ranger should know what shares the desert with them. Because fear is important. It's what kept your ancestors alive. They knew to fear the dark, the wild places, the things that walk on 4 legs and 2. You forgot, but you'll remember now." The text stopped. Robert waited, but no more came. He sat in the dark of his bedroom, phone clutched in his hand, listening to the night sounds of the desert town. Somewhere out there, something wore Ashley Nguyen's face. Walked on 2 legs, answered texts, moved through the world pretending to be human. And there was nothing he could do about it. The next morning, Robert called in sick, first time in 15 years. Susan didn't question it. He spent the day researching. Navajo legends about Yinadlushi, Serrano stories about shapeshifters, accounts from other parks, other rangers buried in forums and obscure websites, people who'd seen things they couldn't explain, animals killed in impossible ways, hikers who vanished and reappeared, changed, an oral history of encounters stretching back centuries. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. The entities existed. They hunted. They survived by wearing the skins and lives of their victims. They were real in a way that defied conventional understanding but couldn't be denied by anyone who'd encountered them. Robert printed everything, built a file, backed it up multiple times. Evidence, or the documentation of his descent into madness. Time would tell which. On the 3rd day, he returned to work. Susan looked at him carefully when he came in, but didn't ask questions. They fell into routine. Patrol schedules, incident reports, tourist assistance. Robert checked on campers at Jumbo Rocks. Someone new was in Site 23. A family from Ohio. Kids running around. Parents trying to set up a tent. Normal, safe. For now. He drove past Bell Campground and stopped to check on the Pattersons. Their Airstream was gone. The site was empty. Jenny at dispatch said they'd checked out early, said they'd decided Joshua Tree wasn't for them after all. Too isolated, too quiet, made them nervous. Robert didn't blame them. Over the following weeks, he developed a routine, extended patrols, extra attention to solo campers, careful documentation of any unusual findings. He found 3 more mutilated animals, a kit fox, a jackrabbit, a roadrunner. Each one showed the same pattern: surgical precision, cold body, warm organs, arranged in patterns he photographed and added to his files. He started carrying different tools, not bear spray. That was useless, but salt in his pockets, iron filings in a vial, symbols copied from Serrano petroglyphs drawn on cards he kept in his wallet. Things the legends said might offer protection. Whether they worked or not, he couldn't say, but they made him feel less helpless. He checked in with Sarah Nguyen once, 3 weeks after the accident, called her to express the park's condolences. She thanked him through tears, said the funeral had been hard, that the family was still processing. Then she said something that made Robert's blood freeze. The strangest thing, though, Ashley's phone is still active. I tried calling it to hear her voice on the voicemail, and someone answered, said wrong number and hung up. Her voice, but not quite right. The phone company says the line is still active, being used. But that's impossible, right? They must have her records mixed up with someone else. Robert assured her it was probably a clerical error. Hung up. Added it to his files. The texts continued. Not often. Once a week, sometimes less. Always from different numbers. Always the same message underneath the varying words. I'm here. I'm hunting. You can't stop me. Robert never responded after that first night. Just documented. Just prepared. Just waited. Because he knew eventually there would be another incident. Another disappearance. Another ranger would find something that didn't make sense. And maybe that ranger would need to know they weren't crazy. That the desert kept secrets. That some of those secrets wore human faces and walked on legs that could shift between 2 and 4. That's why he kept the files. That's why he documented everything. Not to catch the thing. You couldn't catch something like that. But to warn, to prepare, to pass on the knowledge to the next person who encountered what shouldn't exist. 6 months after the incident, Robert was conducting a routine patrol in Hidden Valley when he found another arranged carcass. A bighorn sheep this time, internal organs displayed in a pattern he recognized. He photographed it, documented it, added it to his files. Then he looked up and saw a hiker watching him from the trail. Young man, mid-20s, wearing clothes that looked brand new. The hiker smiled and waved. "Beautiful morning," the hiker called out. "Yes, it is," Robert responded, his hand moving to the salt in his pocket. "Find something interesting?" The hiker started walking toward him. Robert studied the young man's gait, the way his head moved, the timing of his blinks. All normal, all correct, but something underneath, something in the way he walked, like someone who'd learned the motion but hadn't quite mastered the rhythm. "Just nature being nature," Robert said. "You hiking alone? Is that a problem?" The hiker's smile widened. Too wide. Just slightly. "I like the solitude." Robert felt the familiar crawl of fear up his spine. The same sensation from 6 months ago. The recognition that he was looking at something pretending to be human. Something that remembered what Ashley Nguyen had felt like to wear. What other faces it had tried since. "No problem at all," Robert said, backing toward his truck. "Just be careful out here, stay on the marked trails. Don't approach wildlife, and if you hear anything unusual at night, stay in your tent." "Oh, I will," the hiker said. "I'm very good at following rules. I've learned how important they are, how they keep everyone safe." Robert climbed into his truck. The hiker stood watching, still smiling as Robert drove away. In the rearview mirror, the figure remained visible for a long time, standing perfectly still beside the mutilated sheep. before finally dropping to all fours and loping into the rocks. Robert added it to his files when he got back to the station. One more encounter, one more piece of evidence, one more day surviving in a desert that was older and stranger than any map could show. That night his phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was simple. "See you soon, Ranger." Robert didn't respond, just added the screenshot to his backup drive. Then he went outside and looked up at the stars over 29 Palms. The desert stretched out in all directions, vast and ancient and full of things that walked on 4 legs and 2. 15 years he'd worked Joshua Tree. He'd thought he understood it. Now he knew better. You never understood the desert. You just survived it. Day by day, encounter by encounter, always watching, always aware that something might be watching back. And when you found evidence of what shared your space, the mutilated animals, the impossible tracks, the faces that were almost right but not quite, you documented it. You passed it on. You warned the next person. Because the desert kept its secrets. But Rangers kept theirs too, and somewhere in the files, in the backups, in the flash drives hidden in glove boxes, was the truth. The real map of Joshua Tree National Park. The one that showed where the boundaries between human and animal blurred. Where hunger could change you into something else. Where ancient things still hunted under the endless sky. Robert went back inside and locked the door. Tomorrow he'd patrol again, document again, survive again. That's what Rangers did, even when they knew, especially when they knew, that some of the things they were protecting people from couldn't be killed with bear spray or explained in incident reports. Some things just were. And you learned to live with that knowledge. Or it consumed you the way it had consumed others before, the way it would consume others after. The desert kept its secrets, and Robert Fitzgerald kept his. And somewhere in between, something that used to be human walked on 4 legs through the moonlit rocks of Joshua Tree, hunting, always hunting, for the next person who would make the mistake of being alone. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.